Revelation Part 4, Lesson 12. And our discussion this week is on what? The first resurrection and the second death. Exactly. So the first resurrection and the second death were our subjects that we were looking at this week. This study, I gave you a handout. I usually don't give a handout, but I thought it would be better. It's a really good chart to hold on to, and you can add your own notes to it. I've got more if anybody wants another one. But it's a chart that has come from these studies and also from a pastor in Illinois. I always like to give credit where credit's due. He did a great series on this as well. And I think when we studied Ephesians, we also went through, so you may have this chart if you went through one of those with us as well, because it's a good subject matter for us to look at. And we will see if the things on this chart fit in with what we studied, right? Yeah, because I would give you that chart. But there's a lot of information on there, and it's actually kind of hard to see and wade through. So unfortunately for the video, I'll try to put some of it up on the board as well. But we're going to kind of cover the chart and what you learned this week, what we all learned this week through our different places in Scripture will come up instead of just like following through point by point from our lesson. All right? So basically, we aren't trying to put people where they belong. We're trying to understand what God has had to say that makes it the truth. Okay, so when you look at the first resurrection, the statement of first resurrection, and the statement of second death, what chapter in Revelation comes to mind?
Is it 20?
Yes, Revelation chapter 20. Okay, so let's put our minds back into our timeline. What big event happened in Revelation 19? Or several events, actually. Yes, that's Jesus is coming, right? And he comes on a white horse. Okay, is he alone?
No.
No. Who's with him? His army is with him. And I like the weed part, yes. His army is with him. The army is dressed how? Fine linen, right? White and clean. And that was a reference back up a few verses in that same chapter to who? What person?
Oh.
No, not the army dressed in fine linen. There's somewhere else that somebody else is dressed in fine linen. The bride. Exactly. The bride is mentioned, and that's the first time here, in that part of Revelation that the bride is mentioned. Okay, now knowing what we know about what we've been told in other parts of the New Testament, who is the bride?
The church.
The church, right? There's other ways the bride is described. The bride is the church. That's the bride of Jesus, the bride of Christ. And the bride is comprised of two groups of people. Jews and Gentiles in one body. Okay, so we're also the body of Christ, right? That's another way that we're referred to in the New Testament. We kind of keep those ideas in mind to understand what we want to understand about the bride. But we saw, that's in 19, we saw that event because we want to kind of put in context what's happening. That you saw the bride, that they talked about the marriage of the Lamb and the marriage supper of the Lamb, and then you see Jesus' return on a white horse, and you see his armies with him. And what does he come against? What happens as a result? There's a war. And who's he coming against? The nations that have gathered, and who basically is the head of that battle? Well, not Satan, the beast and the false prophet, right? And so you've got these kings of the earth, and then you have other people, the small and the great, have come, and they're an army that we saw gathered previous to this. We saw them gathered in the sixth bowl. I'd have to go back and see which one it was. Y'all can tell me. We saw them gathered, but where did we see them gathered? First, the place called Armageddon, or Armageddon we call it. And they're gathered there by those three frog-like demon things that come out of the mouths of what we call sometimes the unholy trinity, which is the Satan, the dragon is Satan, the beast, and the false prophet, right? So coming out of their mouths, and they go, and I think that's in Revelation 16, it is, and I was right, it's the sixth bowl. I do this from memory, as I'm not always accurate. but it's good to always go look for it. But they're gathered at Armageddon, and then we see them mentioned again in Revelation 17 when there's the description of the woman riding the beast, and the 10 kings are the 10 mountains or the 10 horns. And those 10 kings give their power to the beast, but they also gather for battle against Jesus. And then it says there in verse 14 that he is King of kings and Lord of lords, and those who are with him are the called, the chosen, and faithful. Okay? So again, when you think about 19, who's with him? That's the army dressed in fine linen. And who is that? That's the bride. So the army or the ones coming with him are talked about in different places, and so we see that description and we know, put that together, right? Okay, so that's mentioned there, and then we have the battle in Revelation 19. As a result of that battle, what happens? After that, right, Satan is bound for 1,000 years, but at the end of the battle, what happens to the beast and false prophet? They're thrown into the lake of fire, right? The rest of that army that came against Jesus is what? Killed. How? Sword that proceeds out of Jesus' mouth, and then the birds eat their flesh, and the flesh of the horses as well. And we call that it's called here the Great Supper of God. Okay, so that's the end of 19, and then as Sandy said, going into 20, the first event is Satan being bound for 1,000 years. Okay, and it's in this chapter we see both the statements of the first resurrection and the second death, and those are our main themes, but we kind of wanted to get there. Where are we on our timeline? Where are we in time? And I'm going to start a timeline here that's going to be similar to what you have on your chart. But we're going to go back. I'm not going to put, the seals, trumpets, and bowls over here. I'm just going to put them over here. And this is this period of time, which is what we're covering mostly in Revelation 4 through 22. 4 through 19 is a period of time of how long? 7 years. And then there's the 3.5 is the last part, there's also 3.5 the first part. But the 7 years we also refer to outside of Revelation from where? Daniel. And so we call it Daniel's 70th week. Okay, so this time frame is Daniel's 70th week. And it goes here. Okay, so this is the midpoint. So we have 3.5 years on one side and 3.5 years on the other. And we can't go into all the detail of what we've seen in Revelation so far, just want to put us there, right? Okay, so, because there's things on this chart that are going to happen during that time. And then after that is where we are in 20, right? Or there's events that are happening right here. But we're going into, after the 70th week, we're going into what period of time? The 1,000-year reign. And then there's a period of time, and I'm just going to put new, and it's new heaven, new earth, the new Jerusalem that happens at the end of that 1,000 years. Okay, we got a lot more to fill in, but I wanted to put those on there. So way back here on your chart is the cross. Okay? None of this is proportionate to anything. It's just, this segment is bigger than that segment, and it's not, but we're just putting things on there to get some information. So, as we look at, let me move the cross a little bit. Just a little bit over here. Just a little bit more. Okay. In time, throughout history, throughout the Bible, we're going to think about what happens to people when they die. Okay, that's what we're going to be discussing today, okay? So prior to the cross, what happened to people after the cross, and certainly in this period also, which is future to us, but we've learned about it, and then way future to us, okay? We're going to try to put what happens to people, and that's what we're going to look at on this chart, and that's what we're going to try to put up here, okay? And I said that kind of cautiously, so hang it thou in there, oh baby, all right? Okay, so living is above the line. So living on this earth, we had two classes of people, right? Always and ever. What do we have? Believers and non-believers, right? And we're going to show believers just in a box, unbelievers. And we'll just put U and B for the sake of unbelievers, okay? Just going to put them in a box. They're living on the earth at all times, throughout the Old Testament, right? And New Testament times. Okay, and we also have, who else? The believers. Okay, so we're going to call them, at this point, Old Testament saints. And that kind of looks like the Ten Commandments, sort of. Okay, not that the law is, it has to do in their lives, but whatever. Okay, so during this time when unbelievers die, we want to know what happens. And we're going to separate death. What happens at death is that we separate, right? What do you have after death? You have a dead body, very good, and a soul, right? So that's what we want to look at. What happens to an unbeliever's body when it dies prior to the cross? It's buried. The body is buried. Okay, so you have unbelievers, unbees here, right? Unbelievers' bodies, okay? And then, and we put body on there. And we also have believers, saints, right? Saints' bodies, because they're buried. This is physical. We're buried when we die, right? Now we got to find out what happens to this chart says spirit, but we're going to say spirit or soul, whichever one you want to call it. What happens to the spirit in Old Testament times, prior to the cross times? You looked at it in Luke. Remember Luke 16 in the story of who? Lazarus and the rich man, right? Jesus told this story. It's told in the New Testament. Okay, it's told, you have to understand this. It's told while Jesus is alive, while Jesus is in his ministry. Jesus is alive, but this is in his earthly ministry, his incarnate ministry time frame, prior to the cross, prior to his ascension. That's critical to understand. Okay, so when Jesus tells that story, is he just telling a nice little story?
No.
Would he tell anything that's not true? No, he's telling a true story. Okay, so he's telling a true story of Lazarus and the rich man. What happens to those two? They're both alive. The rich man has had a good life. Lazarus is what? During life. He's a beggar, very poor, at the gates of, so the rich man might have seen him. Okay, both of them die. What happens to them? Okay, the rich man goes to a place that Luke 16 calls Hades, right? So you've got Hades over here, and it's a place, and you looked this up this week, but you also have a place, I'm just trying to make sure my chart is going to say the same thing, that on your chart says paradise, but we didn't look at that this week, so I'm also going to put Abraham's bosom, because that's what Luke 16 calls it. And we'll put that on top of it. You can put it in your box. You can add it to your chart if you want. Okay, these two combined places would be referred to as Sheol. And that includes both parts, Sheol. What's unfortunate and what's been a confusing issue for many, many, many centuries is that the King James Version translated every reference to anything as hell. And that was extremely confusing because we do have Sheol, we have a place called Hades, and we have a place called Abraham's bosom or paradise. Okay? And then we later, as we've studied in Revelation, we have a place called the lake of fire. Okay? So we're going to try to keep those terms a little separate. Okay? But you might be confused if you're going back and looking at, let's say, King James. I'm not sure what the New King James says, but that has been a confusing problem that was introduced because of the translation called the King James Version. And so many throughout time. And today, you know there's people that won't look at anything else. Okay?
I was one.
Okay.
I grew up with.
Absolutely. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. There's many good things
No,
about
but
it.
It opens things up when you look at it.
when you begin to look at other translations. Okay, and that's where, so that's one thing that we just kind of wanted to understand. Okay, so, and I may have to move my cross again a little bit. Because I got some more things to put on here. So I don't want to just put the cross up there when it comes in time. Okay, so you've got unbelievers living on the earth. You've got Old Testament saints living on the earth. Unbelievers and believers. When they die, their bodies go below ground, usually, right? And then their souls go into one of these two places. The souls of the unbelievers go into Sheol, okay? So you've got the unbelievers, spirits or souls, however you want to write that go into Hades. I'm lining it up under it, that. Okay. The souls of the believers, the Old Testament saints, would have gone into Abraham's bosom, or another word for that is paradise. Okay, so the saints...
They're both called Sheol.
Combined, yes. Combined, they're called Sheol. Because remember in the story of Luke, that's told in Luke, tell me the rest of the story. You have both of them die. Lazarus is carried by angels to Abraham's bosom, correct? And the rich man is in a place, what is this place described? How does he describe his condition? Torment, right? There's torment. It refers to heat or fire, right?
And being thirsty.
He's thirsty as a result, definitely thirsty. It's pretty dire, isn't it? Okay, so he there looks so he can see the other side. Right, and he wants relief, right? But what does Abraham's response to that man? What does he say? That can or cannot happen. He says, actually the rich man looks across and says, have Lazarus dip his finger in water and wet my tongue. I thirst, I'm in torment, right? Even in death, he thinks Lazarus is supposed to do something for him. Isn't that interesting? Okay. So he's in torment, he's in fire, and he's thirsty. He looks across at Abraham's bosom, sees Lazarus there, asks for Lazarus to come across, and what is the response to him? Can't happen. Why?
Can't cross.
There's a chasm fixed between the two, okay? So you can even draw a big, deep, bottomless chasm that puts them, but they can see across. They can communicate across, right? It's an interesting thing, okay? So Lazarus being in Abraham's bosom, Abraham also says, if we would want to come, we could not, nor so could you come across here. What does that indicate about once you die?
There's no changing.
There's no changing. Okay? And it's unfortunate because there's been teaching over the time made up by man that has confused people for a long time, thinking that here on this side in life, we could actually pray somebody out of their place. Because it's one of those cases where I talk about we try to out-mercy God. You know, God has said all of this. God set all of this in place. But we don't like that, so we make up a nicer version. And that's out-mercying God.
So is the Sheol, is this a Jewish term, a Hebrew term, or just?
It is a Hebrew term.
Hebrew term, okay.
Yes, it would come from the Old Testament, yes.
Okay.
Yes, that would be a good way, that's a good question. Okay, so you've got these two places, this whole place is a holding place for the spirits of the dead at this point in time. Okay, Hades has the unbelievers. The other side, across that chasm that's fixed, is Abraham's bosom or paradise. And that's where the saints' souls, Old Testament prior to the cross, saints' souls would have gone. Okay? It makes things make a lot of sense when you go back and study Scripture, when you start placing these things as we go ahead. Okay, now, then you have the cross. I wasn't too far off that last time. Okay. Jesus is incarnate, he lives, and he dies, correct? So what happens to Jesus' body?
He's buried in the dead.
Okay, so Jesus is represented with the triangle. Okay, so this is his body. He lived, but he was He was at the cross. His body was buried. Where did his spirit go? Right. What did he say on the cross? Today, one of them would be with him, where? In paradise. How many times have you heard a sermon that says that man went with Jesus to heaven that day? Jesus didn't go to heaven that day. He didn't go. And there's places in Scripture that talk about Jesus. Okay, so Jesus goes, his spirit, along with the other man on the cross, who was a believer at that point and the other one was not. You have that contrast right there with the three crosses, okay? So Jesus' spirit goes to paradise for 3 days, right? Then what happens? He's resurrected, okay? So that's where you have, let's see how it's represented because it's this way. This is where you have this dotted line that comes down your page here, and it shows at this point Jesus' spirit kind of attaching. It's basically shooting you up. I guess here it's straight line, shooting you up, and it says Jesus. This is where Jesus goes, and he's resurrected. Now, it also, he actually is resurrected and hangs around here for a while. And it's not until he goes up at the ascension. A resurrected Jesus' body goes to heaven at his ascension. Remember, and that's 40 days after. That's right, prior to Pentecost. But it also shows Jesus' body. So it's spirit and body are resurrected and go to at the ascension to heaven. Okay, that's why it's like that. Now, you got this strange little thing right there that we're going to talk about in a second. But what happens at Jesus' ascension is they've got paradise also attaching to this line. Because it says Jesus took captive the captives. Remember you saw that this week? Okay, so if he went and preached to those in the place of the dead, for those during that 3 days, he took, at his ascension, he took the saints' souls with him. Notice that, the saints' souls with him to heaven. Okay, but remember what happened when Jesus died? Some came out of their tombs. Some people in Jerusalem were resurrected. That's why you have that strange little thing up here that shows some saints' bodies were also, some saints' souls were also united with bodies and went with him at his ascension. But basically, you've got up here, you've got paradise up here with Jesus at this point. On the other side of the cross, at the other side, you've got the Old Testament saints' spirits, and you have some souls and bodies and spirits together, some resurrected.
So then people now are kind of like in a different holding pattern or something? That's what I think of it, you know, a holding pattern. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy.
I know.
But before you're here, and now you're here. So.
Okay, well what happened is, and I've got it up here so we're gonna talk about it. I heard somebody say some, right?
Who falls into the some category?
The
Yeah.
ones that were resurrected at Jesus' death. Remember, it talks about it in one of the Gospels. It says when Jesus was died, that the tombs were opened and some came out of the tombs and walked around in the town and people saw them. They were resurrected. Well, they're not going to be resurrected to die again because what are we promised? One death, right? So if some were resurrected, and I don't believe they came out and walked around too much till after he was resurrected, but they might have, they would have then, they're not going to die again. So when Jesus ascended, he would have taken the spirits out of paradise with him to heaven, the spirits with him, but there were some who were resurrected into bodies. And so they're resurrected like Jesus. They're first fruits. He's first fruits, remember? Jesus is raised to be the first fruits. What does the first fruits indicate?
There will be a harvest.
There's a harvest to follow. And we're going to get to that also. Okay, now, after the cross, you have on the earth what?
Believers and unbelievers.
Right, same thing. You got believers and they represent yeah, just a circle with New Testament saints. Okay, similar and parallel to this, Old Testament saints, New Testament saints, they're believers. Okay, salvation's not different, trust me. Salvation prior to the cross still was based on faith alone, in Christ alone, because literal Abraham, I don't mean it that way, but I'm not referring to Abraham's bosom, the place, but Abraham, it says in the Old Testament that it was reckoned to him as righteousness. That's in Genesis, I don't think where. And then you have in the New Testament, it refers back to that, and it says God preached the gospel to Abraham, and he believed, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. What did he preach to Abraham? The gospel. Paul tells us what the gospel is. The gospel is, in 1 Corinthians 15, the death, burial, resurrection, and appearance to many. The proof of the resurrection also is the appearance to many. And that would have occurred before the ascension. And a few saw the ascension. They saw him go up in the cloud, right? That's what the ascension means, if you're wondering what I mean by that term. Okay? So, you have, after the cross, unbelievers, and you have saints on the earth, alive. What happens when they die?
They get buried.
Okay, their bodies, I keep not leaving myself, unbelievers' bodies and New Testament saints' bodies are buried, right? That's what happened today. If you went to a funeral today, eventually that body would be buried or cremated or whatever, right? Okay, so this is the idea that they exist, but when they die, their bodies, okay, what happens to their spirits?
Absent of the body.
Yeah.
Present with the Lord.
Okay, not all of them, not the unbelievers.
Oh, no.
So let's start with the unbelievers, but I love that all of you are going, right? Okay, you have on this side, not another Hades, but you have these same Hades. Okay, so in that same Hades, you've got unbelievers' spirits. You've got all of these, and now these. Yes,
So
Sandy?
is that still called Sheol?
You could, but it only has in it the one side. Okay? If it's some sort of geographic point we can point to, which I just hesitate to say that, then that chasm would still be there, but the other side would be empty. Okay? Because that other side is now, what was in it, that other side is after the cross. Okay? So, when an unbeliever dies, its body is buried, and the soul or spirit goes to Hades still. And these souls are still there too. Okay, so it's not separate. You could put them in there as well. So, what happens to the New Testament? That's what everybody was grinning about. What happens to the New Testament that dies? Body goes into the ground, spirit goes, yes, up. Spirit goes here. So the spirits of New Testament saints. Spirits. Because we want to believe that, right? We do want to believe that. But how do we know that? Absent from the body, present with the Lord. It didn't say that in the Old Testament. Okay? It said Lazarus went to Abraham's bosom. That's what it said. And then it said when Jesus was when he died, he went somewhere and he went to where there were captives and he set those captives free. Okay? Talks about him preaching to those souls in prison. And he set those captives free. Took them to paradise with him back to heaven. Heaven isn't paradise. Paradise is in heaven. Do you see the difference? Okay. And then the New Testament body is buried and the New Testament spirit goes to be with Jesus. Okay? Now, Jesus is, well, it says on your chart, presence of the Lord. Because where is Jesus right now? He's in heaven. So when you die, you go to be with him. You go to the presence of the Lord, if you're a New Testament, if you're a believer. Okay. Now, we dealt last week with the rapture. So when Jesus comes back, and we believe it's just prior to here, he comes back and in a cloud, right? What happens? So the New Testament saints, I hear Martha saying it, are what? Reunited with their bodies, right? And you've also got some of the New Testament saints that are alive. You've got the body and the spirit being reunited. If they're dead prior to prior to the rapture, then their body and their spirit are reunited. If you're alive and remain, remember that we studied last week? You don't go ahead of them, but we all meet in the cloud with Jesus, right? And we call this the rapture.
So we're not buried.
Not if you're alive.
Rapture.
Yeah, not if you're alive. If you die prior to that, then yes. Okay, so that's the rapture. And notice we keep it off the ground. if that makes sense. Okay, now, when this time frame starts, who are around during that time frame? Who's the main? Two witnesses. And those on this chart are represented by like two concentric rings, or two, not concentric, but two kind of linking rings. Those are the two witnesses, okay? And you also have on earth what this is calling, like with a sword, tribulation saints. But remember, the term tribulation is a little controversial or a little bit odd. But so we can say Daniel's 70th week, we know this half is definitely called the Great Tribulation, right? So there are going to be believers on the earth this entire time, or can be believers on the earth during that time, people coming to the knowledge of Jesus and getting saved. We've agreed to that, right? Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead for sake of argument and call them tribulation saints. Because I do think this is a time that's tribulation, but the last part is the Great Tribulation. Okay, they're alive, and what happens to them when they die? What happens to the two witnesses? What happens to the tribulation saints when they die? The tribulation saints weren't literally buried because their bodies lay on the ground, but in essence they would have been buried, right? Okay, so you would have the tribulation saints, certainly, their bodies during this time would go, and you can draw the sword and whatever else you want to put around that to try to represent the tribulation saints. But the two witnesses died also, and at that midpoint, the two witnesses are up here, because they're called up, aren't they? Mm-hmm. So you have the two witnesses up there, resurrected, if you want to put resurrected beside it. And you have, you have the tribulation saints' bodies here, but the tribulation saints' spirits would go to heaven, right? Okay, so they're represented up there. Their spirits would go up there, okay? So up in, we didn't put it over here, but up here, they've got New Testament resurrected up there, representing the New Testament saints that are resurrected. So in heaven, at this point in time, prior to Jesus' return all the way to earth, what do you have? You have some Old Testament saints that have bodies and are resurrected. You definitely have Jesus resurrected in heaven. And now, after the rapture, you've got New Testament resurrected believers that we would also call what? The church, the body of Christ, the bride. Okay? So the New Testament resurrected believers that raptured here, that's the church. That's the bride. But the tribulation saints are believers. So when they die, body goes in the ground and spirit goes to heaven. So you have their spirits at this point in heaven. Spirits, you have Old Testament spirits, Old Testament believers' spirits. You have a few Old Testament believers' resurrected bodies. You have Jesus's resurrected body. And now you have New Testament resurrected bodies and tribulation plus 2 witnesses resurrected. 2 witnesses are resurrected also. Bodies. Okay, so over here, when you have Jesus coming all the way back to earth, all the way to earth, you have Jesus coming back, right? And it shows him with a crown. And they kind of distinguished it like his crown's a little better than everybody else's. It should be, right? But who comes with him at his second coming? Yes, and so we're going to put them with the crown too, just not as good. So the New Testament saints, the bride, come back with him at his second coming. That's called the second coming. I'm glad y'all got a better chart than I read. Okay. But also, what happens, because we see it in Revelation 20, when the thrones are set, Satan has been bound for 1,000 years. Okay, go back to Revelation 19, the battle of Armageddon, beast and false prophet are cast in the lake of fire. The army that came against Jesus is killed. Okay, so all of those that were killed at this point would go into Hades, right? Because they're unbelievers. Their bodies would be buried or eaten, and their spirits would go to Hades. But at Jesus' return, you still have living people on the earth. It's hard to imagine, but we do. But at the thing that we're told in Revelation 20 is thrones are set up, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given to them. Now, the they there is not real clear, but if you go back up enough, the they would be those that came with Jesus. Right? They're the only theys that I can see that it would be. Thrones, yes. Because for judgment. Okay, and next week we're going to learn a little bit more about that. Okay, we're going to understand what goes on in that beginning of the millennial reign. But judgment was given to them. Then it says, I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of the testimony of Jesus, because of the word of God, because they had not taken the mark of the beast, they had not worshipped the beast or his image. All of those qualifiers. But they'd also been beheaded. They've been killed. So they're dead. What does it say happens to them? They come alive and reign with Christ. So here you have these tribulation saints' bodies coming with their spirits coming alive at that point. They're not coming back with Jesus. They come alive when he comes back. They come alive. Those could be the ones we find listed in Revelation 6 under the 5th seal called the souls under the altar, right? Because of their testimony, and they're given a white robe, right? And then you turn the page to Revelation 7 and we have the 144,000 mentioned, and we also have the group called the Great Multitude. And when we see them in Revelation 7, we know they come out. It says they come out of that second half, that great tribulation, that we finally have defined as when that is. And they're killed because they're standing before the throne, crying out. They're not crying out. The souls were crying out. But the great multitude, later, at the beginning of Revelation 19, it says, and I heard the loud voice of a great multitude in heaven saying, Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and power belong to our God, because his judgments are true and righteous. For he has judged the great harlot. They're rejoicing because Babylon has been destroyed. Because she is held responsible for their deaths. And they're rejoicing. But we know they come out of the Great Tribulation. That's one of the last things that happens at the end of that Great Tribulation is Babylon is destroyed. Their biggest issue was Babylon. Biggest problem. And they're killed. So they're dead during this time, and their spirits are there, but they come back together when Jesus returns. At the end of that age, at the end of that 70th week. At the end of those 7 years, at the end of that. Okay. So they come alive. But then it says the rest of the dead, what? So we're not talking about believers dead. The rest of the dead, they don't come to life until back here. Okay? So now we've got at this point, we know we have what we call the Great White Throne Judgment, right? That's also listed in Revelation 20, the Great White Throne Judgment, which happens after the 1,000 years. So all of Hades, all of the dead in Hades, that means all the dead unbelievers, right? Come to life here. And their bodies come with them. And you have to drag that over there too, if you want to drag those lines. You don't have to drag the lines.
And unbelievers in the tribulation, they're going there too, right?
Unbelievers?
Unbelievers.
Yes, they would go in here too, yes. Any time during, I didn't just write it, I don't write all of it over here, but yes. There are unbelievers that died during this time too, and their souls would always go
What
to
about
Hades.
unbelievers that are alive?
Oh yes, we haven't gotten to that yet. There are believers and unbelievers alive, but we're talking about the dead ones right now. They don't come alive till here, okay? But at this point, and that's another great point, we have what we talk about in Matthew 25, the sheep and the goats, right? So here, and that would be, but prior to the 1,000 years, I'm just going to drag it down here, you've got the sheep and the goats, judgment, right? Remember it says when Jesus returns, he sets up a throne, and the nations are gathered before him. Nations does not indicate Jewish people. Remember? Unless he's saying the nation of Israel, when God refers to nations, he's talking about everybody else. Because remember the criteria that these nations that are gathered are based, their criteria of judgment is what? How they treated the Jews, Jesus' brethren, right? So throughout this time, when they get to this point right here, alive people that are alive, are gathered before Jesus. This is after the Battle of Armageddon. After the winepress has been trodden with the blood coming up the horse's bridle for 200 miles, and Jesus' garments are stained in blood because he tread the winepress. Okay, he's been really building this up. Where is everybody on earth, you know? You've got, over here, you've got Armageddon, you've got Jerusalem below it, and over there you've got Babylon. Babylon is being destroyed. The beast is over here with, he's not being destroyed, the beast is over here with those that are gathered at Armageddon who are going to come down against Jerusalem first and destroy the city. We saw that in the Old Testament prophecies. And then Jesus is going to come to Basra, and he's going to ride back and tread the winepress, and the blood's going to come up and all of that. And that's going to be the battle against him that we call the Battle of Armageddon. Doesn't mean it happens at Armageddon. It means they were gathered at Armageddon. In the Valley of Decision, Valley of Jehoshaphat, that's between the Mount of Olives and Jerusalem. Remember? That's where it's going to happen.
Is that like a bowl there?
It's definitely a valley. And it might be even represented as a bowl. Okay, so we've got the sheep and goats. The sheep and goats are from the nations. And they're going to be divided by Jesus. Righteously, he knows the right from wrong. And he's going to put the sheep on his right hand, and he's going to put the goats on his left hand. The sheep are called the righteous. Okay, if they're righteous, they're what? Saved. Yes, they're believers. So these are righteous, positive are. The goats are what? Negative are. They're unrighteous. They're called accursed, I believe, is what it says in Matthew 25, Matthew 25. So he separates them, and as a result, what happens to the righteous? What does he say? They inherit the kingdom prepared for them, right? So they walk into this time, into the 1,000 years. So you've got the sheep living and walking into the 1,000 years alive. What happens to the unrighteous? Where are they?
Eternal punishment.
They're assigned the place of eternal punishment, right? Okay. So during this 1,000 years even, that would at least be the Hades that they would go to. They're thrown there. So they are alive at this point, but that's where they're assigned, is the place of torment. Maybe they go straight to the lake of fire. They will ultimately go to the lake of fire, the great white throne. So I'm not exactly sure because that reference isn't quite clear, but ultimately they would go. Daniel 12, remember, talks about a time of distress like they've never seen before. And we know it to be definitely this time, because it says it's 1,260 days, but this whole time is bad, but this time is an intense time that God warned them about over and over again, but certainly in Daniel 12. And he divides the Jewish people in that passage of Daniel 12 into two groups. One are going to go, they're going to be resurrected, and one's going to go where? To the good place. And one's going to go to the bad place, right? Whatever the terminology is in Daniel 12, okay, we could be a little better than that, so make it actually turn in. But that's over and over again through Scripture, we see the choices made. I mean, I hate to use the word choice. I just hate to use the word choice because we are called, we are chosen, the choice is on God's side. We just agree with it and get in it. Okay, so it's either to everlasting life or to disgrace and everlasting contempt is what Daniel 12 calls it. Okay? So, and we saw in the Old Testament prophecies that up until Jesus returned here, there's going to be a purging of the Jews. 2/3 are going to be cut off, and 1/3 is going to remain. Therefore, the 1/3 that remains alive, that at this point, they're going to look on Jesus, whom they pierced, and they're going to mourn. But it says all Israel will be saved. The 1/3 that's left at this point will also walk into 1,000 years because they're alive.
considered the all Israel.
That's the all Israel is the 1/3 that's left. Yeah, because 2/3 are cut off. That's in Malachi or Zechariah. It's in one of those. So we have, at this point, you have the great white throne judgment. And the dead and death and Hades are brought before the great white throne judgment of Revelation 20. What is their fate? Where do they go? The lake of fire. So I always draw it down here somewhere. And I call it the LOF. And already there, at this point, are the beast and the false prophet. They've been thrown there. But in Matthew 25, I think it's Matthew 25, it talks about the group that's going there, the unrighteous. Well, maybe it's not there. It talks about they're going to go to the place that was prepared for the devil and his angels. It tells us that somewhere. I can't come up with it right now. But the lake of fire. So we know at this point, death, Hades, and the dead are all cast into the lake of fire. We know the beast and the false prophet are already there from this point. And we know at the end of the 1,000 years, when even before the great white throne, you've got Satan who is released and he's thrown. He's killed and thrown into the lake of fire. That's what it says in Revelation 20. So I hate to put it this way, but we're putting people where to go, right? Okay. Remember that we looked up and it said when Jesus comes, every enemy of his is going to be under his feet. They are already positionally, because Jesus is seated in the heavenlies. That's what I think Philippians tells us. Jesus is seated in the heavenlies with everything underneath him. But in time and in the economy of God and the cleaning up of everything and figuring it all out and bringing it all to complete and utter fulfillment, it doesn't happen until this point. And at that point, the final enemy that will be dealt with by Jesus before Jesus hands everything over to the Father as complete is what? What's the final enemy? Death. Not even Satan. Death. Does it make sense now? Because it's not just the dead that face the great white judgment, but Hades, the place, just like paradise went there, Hades also is brought. So the place, in essence, is brought. But also what is part of all that is death itself. Because what power does Satan have over the people on this earth? The fear of death. That's what we're told. So Jesus, having conquered death here, he conquered death. How did he conquer death? First he lived and died, and then he rose. That's our proof that he conquered it. He left the grave, in essence. He wasn't held, his body wasn't held anyway, but he left what they would call the grave, but it's really Sheol. Again, poor translation sometimes. He left Sheol. He was resurrected into his body, walked around for people to see, and then he left in a cloud. And what's he coming back in each time? A cloud. They were promised that. Kind of makes you look at clouds a little differently, doesn't it? And then the very last enemy is death itself. It's gone. What are we promised at this point in Revelation 21 and 22? Eternal life, which is obviously in contrast to death. There's going to be eternal death. Here, they don't get obliterated and they're just gone. They live in that state eternally. If you think this was bad, do you think this might be worse? Yeah. This is the place that God has prepared from all time for Satan and his angels. And people are going to be there. And they're going to be there in a body. Because when they come to the great white throne, they're not coming in spirit. They're resurrected with their bodies. It says they come alive. In Revelation 20 it tells us that.
But you know, this is one of those hello moments.
Yes.
Because his whole ministry, all through the Bible, when he was going to the cross, his message was eternal life.
Yeah.
And we just skim over it all the time.
We do.
Don't
It
even-
almost
doesn't
becomes
register.
a common
Not
term.
important, you know,
Yeah.
eternal life.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it? Huh. It definitely beats eternal death, right?
That
Yeah,
was
they
the
get it.
entire, the
Yeah.
one and only
Yeah.
message.
Well, and y'all have heard me say this before. Sometimes, in light of what you're saying, even knowing what, this kind of brings some things to, like, we think about them differently.
Yes.
As believers, we should. The prayer we prayed this morning kept talking about, this is not my home. So the problems you're having in this life, the problems I had this week, you know, give me a perspective of, pull up these roots. This is not my home. My heaven is not here. I can't bring it here. I can make it as good as I can. You know, I mean, I shouldn't go around like making it worse or doom and gloom. But you have that yearning for another place that is true life. Jesus says not just eternal life, but He is the living water that He's going to pour out. Notice, this guy wanted water. And they're going to go into a lake of fire, not a watery lake of fire, a lake of fire, where the worm dies not, and the thirst cannot be quenched. And they gnash their teeth, because it hurts so much. You saw that over and over, gnash their teeth. If you're in pain, what do? You clench your jaw, the next thing you know, you've got a sore jaw. Yeah, you do, and you're grinding those molars. But this is, yes?
I always think that passage, they hate you because they hate me. So
Yes.
Yes,
It's in John
yes, Jesus is saying, it's what you're saying.
chapter 15.
Yeah, and he also goes on in that passage, if it's the same one, at least somewhere, he says a similar thing, and he says, you know, you're not better than your master. Look what they did to Jesus. Do you think it's going to go well for me? If I align myself, and the more I align myself, and try to look more and more like Him, because that's what we're supposed to be doing in this sanctification process, right? Not trying, but we are supposed to be being refined. The best way to get clean and pure is turn up the heat.
It's coming.
Yeah. But some of us
But we have
live,
to
and you have
adjust.
times, and you're like, I mean, the health problems you had this past year, what Janet's going through right now. These are not easy times. And I'm not saying it's all spiritual warfare. Sometimes it isn't, sometimes it is. Sometimes it's just the product of the fall, and there's illness and the world's cursed. We're groaning. It says all of creation is groaning, but it said this week in one of our passages, we are groaning in these bodies. This is the earthy, remember? Earthly. But we yearn for the heavenly. And it's, I've told you before, when we did Hebrews, I got that understanding of what we see, what is known to us, what is real that we can knock on. It's solid, right? This is material, and we think this is real. But the real is where? In heaven. So even what God gave them as a pattern, and he did give it to Moses for the tabernacle, and later that solid structure, the temple, and there's going to be another one, or our bodies as the temple of the Holy Spirit. This is what we know, and this is what we understand, and we see this as real. But Jesus is saying the real casts a shadow, and what we're living in is just a shadow. In essence, what we understand. We've got light coming in, and it casts a shadow so that you've got substance, and if light's behind it, the shadow is not the substance. There has to be light. Isn't that awesome? Mm-hmm. There has to be light that casts a shadow. But what we're living is the shadow. So this life that we hang on to so hard, and we should, God values life, is not even the real life. That's what we're going to be with someday, when the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem, where death has been obliterated, death has been destroyed, all of enemies, including death, including Satan, including the false prophet, including the beast, all the evil before, every bit of it has been annihilated. It's here forever, can't get out. So we walk in to the new heaven, new earth, New Jerusalem, in our imperishable bodies, right? The mortal has given up to immortality. The perishable has given up to the imperishable. We can't be in God's presence in this body. We got to get a new one, and he gives it to us. We didn't get this one. We didn't do anything to get this one. We don't do anything to do the next. But we walk in here, in that body. But guess what? There's people alive at this point. What do we do with them? What's that? They keep living. How do they keep living? End of Revelation chapter 21 and going into Revelation chapter 22. You get a clue. How do they go on living? Because who cannot come into the city? The tree of life is the key, right? Don't you love it when God brings something up back in Genesis and he ties it up in Revelation? Here you go. The tree of life in Genesis chapter 2 is told to us, Genesis chapter 3, is told to us to be the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil are where? In Genesis? In the Garden of Eden, in the middle, right? The two trees, okay? And who else is there? Adam and Eve, right? Adam and Eve are there. And who walks with them? God every day, right? Okay, then walking in is the serpent of old that we're talking about in Revelation chapter 12. The serpent of old walks in. He has legs, right? And he does what? He also speaks and he deceives with his words. Who does he deceive? Eve first. Eve is deceived. That's what even the New Testament tells us. Eve was deceived. He asks her some questions, and he calls into question God's nature. And he says, eat from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If you do that, you will be like God. Remember when we studied those passages, we believe that we're representing Satan, which I think are in Ezekiel and Isaiah, and it says, I will raise my throne to the Most High. I will ascend. I will. Those are the I wills we believe of Satan. Okay? He wanted to be God. What do we see at this point in time in the temple walks in who? The Antichrist, the man of lawlessness, the beast. And he stands in the temple of God where worship of God only should be happening, and he says what? I am God. There is no other. You on earth cannot worship anything else but me. right? And who ultimately does he point people to for worship? Satan. Keep pointing up, I should point over or down. He wants them to represent, I mean, that's ultimately worship of the beast is worship of Satan, who gives him his power, or the dragon, he gives him his power to the beast. But the beast is destroyed. The world goes, now what do we do? The world has no deception during this time because Satan's bound. But people are born during this time. You've got righteous people walking into the 1,000 years alive, but they have children. You saw those passages this week, right? A child, an infant will not die in infancy anymore. No more infant death. There's no more death here. There is death, can be death here. If someone dies before 100 years old, what are they thought of? Accursed. Something's wrong with you. In other words, you shouldn't die during this time. You could live. They could walk in with age and live 1,000 years. They will, sorry. They will walk in with some age. They've been alive. And they will live for 1,000 more years, 1,024, 1,053, 1,000 whatever is going to be their age at the end of the 1,000 years. They could be, but there's going to be children born during this time. Those children may or may not be righteous at the point of Satan being released. And what is Satan allowed to do at the end? To deceive. And he does a good job of it, doesn't he? It's hard to imagine 1,000 years without him, 1,000 years on this earth, all that time. And he gets to deceive, and he does, because it says in Revelation 20, he gathers them, Gog and Magog, he gathers the nations against the holy city, again in the broad plain. Remember, prior to this, earth has been changed. Everything it has been leveled, but Jerusalem has been raised up. Remember? We saw that? So they're on the broad plain surrounding the camp of the saints and surrounding the holy city. And what happens to them? Fire comes down from heaven and destroys them. And then Satan's cast into the lake of fire. That final ability for people to either follow God in righteousness or prove that they're unrighteous through being deceived. And they're purged. They're done. But then they're brought to life and cast into the lake of fire with this group. So who goes into this period? Is there anybody alive? Yeah. There's believers that live through the 1,000 years that are alive kind of similar to we are now, right? So what happens to them? Is that it? Close. That's the final, yeah. Okay, but you've got to see a little bit of difference in Revelation 21. Who is the city? Who is the city? The bride. It's coming down out of heaven. The New Jerusalem is the city, is the bride. Right? Okay, but there's other good guys, we'll call them. Right? And you've got people who've lived through the 1,000 years. Those would be what's called the nations here.
You mean individuals?
Yes.
Well, that's strange because last week I was thinking about, failing minds and bodies and all. And I was thinking, well, Noah lived, I don't know what, 800, whatever it was, hundreds of years. And Abraham, Noah, and all the others, they weren't senile.
Right.
Why do we fail? Our bodies fail.
That's
Their
a long
bodies did not
question.
fail. They got old
Right.
and they weren't as agile, but they did not fail.
Prior to the flood, the
Why
world
can't I be like that?
was a little different. After the flood, the world is a little different.
Yes.
And certainly the further we go in time away from the moment sin entered the world,
The hundreds become fewer.
the more sin's effect multiplies. Exponentially, I shouldn't even say multiplies, exponentially increases on the earth. It
We're
just gets
so
worse.
material minded, is that what you're saying?
It's sin, evil, eaten up with it. I mean, and the
okay.
world, and so then you've got disease and everything else, but you've got the evilness that just gets worse and worse the further we get away. It was so bad that God destroyed him with a flood, and it's been a long time since then. It's multiplied again. I mean, exponentially gone up. So we're at that point, that here though,
They must have been good.
Compared to us? It's hard to believe that it
To-
could be
1,000.
any worse than what we're dealing with. I mean, that they could be
I
as
know.
bad as what we're dealing with now.
I know, it is hard to believe, but they're going to be human, okay? Let's put ourselves back into the garden. Satan walked in, right? They had a perfect setting. They were so perfect and pure and everything was great, they didn't even have to wear clothes. They could be in each other's presence and didn't even have to be clothed. There was no shame, there was nothing to hide, there was nothing to cover up. I would say they had perfect bodies too, I would think that, right? Okay? And they walked with God every day in the garden. I love that song, you know, Come to the Garden Alone, remember that? I always think of that. But they were in the garden. No sin had marred anything yet, but they were still had the ability for it to happen. Just like when Satan was created by God, he was a covering cherub. He was beautiful in appearance. He had at his disposal gems and precious stones that he would put in sockets and settings. He had a job, right? He had a great job, but then he started getting a little full of himself, a lot full of himself, and thought, well, why can't I be like him? I'm already hovering over him. Well, you know, why can't I exalt myself? I am going to be, I could be just like him. And so that was Satan's fall.
But
There
we
was-
invited him.
Well, that was his fall. That was his individual fall. But he walks into the garden and talks to the woman, deceives her, and she turns and hands the fruit to her husband, who probably stood there and listened to the entire conversation and said nothing. That's called implied consent. And then he ate. It's when he ate that he sinned. Eve was deceived. Adam sinned. This week you looked at the first Adam and the last Adam. First Adam brought sin into the world. The last Adam does what? He destroys death. He paid for it. That's one way he did it. He was resurrected and proved he did not ever sin. He wouldn't have been resurrected otherwise. Not that way. But we get resurrection as a result of him. We didn't deserve it. He gave us his righteousness. We couldn't make that happen. We couldn't drum it up. We couldn't clean ourselves up enough. But we're just completely cleansed at our spiritual birth. All sin is gone, taken care of, impure. But we still walk around in these earthy things, this earth suit, as that pastor friend of mine said. And as such, we struggle. Remember that travail that Paul talks about? We struggle in this life. But we have the Spirit in us and the ability at times to make the right choice and not sin if we allow the Spirit to control us during that time. We're just not real good at that a lot. And then we deal with all this stuff outside of us, okay, and all that too. That's part of this world and this life. But there are people at this point who come through this time alive. What has to happen for them to go into the new heaven and the new earth and the new Jerusalem? They're not the new Jerusalem. The bride is the new Jerusalem. So just think of it in terms of, I live within the city limits of Madisonville, but you can go half a mile and be outside the city limits of Madisonville, but you can have a Madisonville postal address, right? Okay, so you're living outside the city. You don't pay taxes. And you may or may not, you don't get the services of the city because I pay city taxes and county taxes. Do you understand the analogy? Okay, so in this time you've got new heaven, new earth, and new Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is on the new earth. But outside the city you have what? You've got the nations, right, that can come in and out. The gates are not closed. But they can't come in and out unless they're righteous. But they're not the city. It's just the way God has made it here. I'm not making this up. It says it right here.
And they come and they bring the tributes and all of
Yes,
that
they bring their
stuff.
glory inside. They bring their tribute. Yeah.
And then, as time goes on, what?
Same thing.
How do they live? Sorry, it's 22 in my book. I'm pointing to chapter 22. How do they live? Eternally. They eat what? They eat the leaves. The leaves are for the healing of the nations. Okay, so again, contrast back to the Garden of Eden. What had to happen as a result of sin and eating from the knowledge of tree of knowledge of good and evil? God said, we got to do something because of what? Because of sin, we have to keep them from eating the tree of life. So they were kicked out of the garden, and cherubim, that's plural, were outside the garden with sword turning in every direction. If you look at the cherubim of Ezekiel, they've got wheels and they have heads that go in all direction and wings and all of that. If they're describing cherubim there, that would maybe be the same type. And they protect so that no one can go back in the garden. And never again do we hear about the tree of life until here. And it will be in the city. Where is the city? On earth, the new earth. You have a new heaven, a new Jerusalem, and a new earth. And New Jerusalem comes down to earth, and there's people outside it that can come into it and eat from the tree of life. You can eat from the leaves. There's fruit on it too. But they eat from the tree of life. That's how they live forever. That's how they're healed. Healed from what? Sin. From the body, this mortal body. I'm wondering, hear me that, I'm very careful here, I don't know, but I'm wondering if that healing isn't a basic transformation, taking them from mortal to immortal. Or is it something they have to continually eat in order to stay? I don't know. Could Adam and Eve walk over and eat from the tree of life right then and stay alive forever? Or would they have had to be in the presence of it and continue to eat? I don't know. But we certainly know they couldn't, and no other human born after that that's born in sin was allowed to go anywhere near that tree, because God did not want man to live forever in this body of sin. He didn't want that. But they will either be in eternal death or they'll be in eternal life. And this is the real, that's the life. And death has been abolished. So God says, behold, we have a new time. All old things have passed away. Behold, all things are new. No more tears. No more sorrow. No more pain. No more death. Because the old things have passed away. All that's gone. Remember, everything, heaven and earth, fled away from the presence of the great white throne. It's gone. It's gone. I don't know how people were suspended, but God could do that. And then He brings the new heaven, new earth, and new Jerusalem. Did we put everything where it needed to go? It makes you look at things completely differently, doesn't it? Did we not cover something that we looked at this week, possibly? Yes, Sandy?
22 verse 15, outside of the dogs and the sorcerers and immortal persons and the murderers and the idolaters and everyone who loves and practices lying. Now this is on the new heaven and the new earth. So there's still bad people out there?
That's a good question. If anything, we know they're not in.
Right.
Okay, we know that.
The verse before says that if you've washed your robes, then you have the right to the tree of life. But then the next one says outside.
Outside, right. So I've often wondered, just like back here, is part of the lake of fire the ability to see all this? Is that lake of fire on earth, under earth, near earth? I don't know. But is part of being in the lake of fire being able to see this?
That's real torture.
Yeah, I agree. That's real torture. And it was the same here. They understood there was the other side, and apparently they could see and converse, but there was a chasm fixed between. So outside, and it seems to reference to the city, outside the city is the place where there are those. And it's one of many lists of those who will never inherit the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God definitely starts here, but it definitely continues. If you're part of this in the right way, you're definitely there. And you're not part of this list. But this is the final purge. Oh, sorry, here. This is that final ability to be deceived. The final ability to try to come against God. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. God wins. This is why we say, isn't it great to read the final chapter? You know, yeah. And when they meet the great white throne, there's books opened, and then another book. What book is that? The book of life. It really all boils down to, are you in the book of life at your judgment, or are you not? Okay. Are believers judged after they die? We're told that, aren't we? It's appointed to man once to die, and then the judgment. We're told as believers throughout the New Testament, I will have to give an account for every word that proceeds out of my mouth. I'm a very wordy person. Yes, yikes is usually always. Yeah. It's a very,
We had to read 1 Corinthians
okay.
15,
Yes.
35 to 40. And I'm just wondering, was anybody else in here affected by that? I thought that was...
1 Corinthians 15 she's talking about. The first part is that.
It's in our back of our lesson.
Right. The first part of that chapter is the part that defines the gospel. I think we have to put that into context. It's so important to understand that Paul is addressing the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, and then his appearance to many, because,
I understood what I read.
okay,
I was just affected by it.
okay,
I
What
thought it
way?
was- I just thought it just broke down very on elementary level, like for a first grader. And I just felt that, wow, that makes you realize.
yeah.
And I just thought it was great.
Good, I'm glad. Because as she called it, this is probably one of the best passages about the resurrection and what is involved in it. And so it's really important, and therefore I think God makes it real elementary so that we can understand it.
And you have to be told over and over
Yes.
again like a first grader, for it makes a groove up there.
Mhm. And it
And you
comes
remember.
through circumstances sometimes, and it comes through a reminder, a study, it comes from different places. So I love that God reminds. I mean, he set up the feasts and festivals for Israel as reminders. Why? Because we got bad brains.
We forget very easily.
We forget. We get away from things and we need the reminder. It doesn't need to become routine. It doesn't need to become casual and we yawn or we stop paying attention. I mean, right now, every one of us, while we were talking or you're listening to me, could be reciting, I can, right now, as I'm talking, the Pledge of Allegiance in my head. And I don't even have to think. Problem is, we don't think when we say it. Or the Lord's Prayer.
Or the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah, I could say the Lord's Prayer easily. Or maybe quote certain passages easily without stopping and thinking. And that's why sometimes I'll say, okay, let's just stop and think about these words. Because they're so familiar, which is great, because God brings them to our remembrance in times. But they're also so familiar sometimes we stop listening to them. And we need to stop and listen. And that's one of the things, I'm glad it affected you. But I guess the question that just kept coming to my mind at the end is, where is your name written?
It's a little unnerving, isn't it? We all think, of course.
But are our names, when we do the study in Romans, we'll go over this over and over again. You hear me say when? I do think we'll do covenant and then we'll do Romans. But you'll have this question, I have this question over and over and over again. What are you counting on? Because just to go to the Jews for a little bit, they counted on their genetics. Okay? They counted on holding the law and tablets of stone even. They had the law. It was in that big box, in that big building of ours. It's not really that big, right? The tablets of stone were in the Ark of the Covenant, in the tabernacle. They never personally saw them, but they were there. We have them. We're the man. We're the great group, right? They were the keepers. Now they also tried to keep the law in following the law. And they also believed in circumcision. Okay? Those Jews, they were just not so bright, right? And I'm very facetiously saying that. Because now let's look at us.
People who live in glass houses.
We believe, we have glass houses. We believe in our baptism. which might have just been somebody pouring water on me. I was a baby, somebody put some water in their hands and put it on top of my head, and that did something to me. No, but I believed in it because I was told to believe in it. Or I walked down and I said the right words at a particular time because I wanted to become a member. So my name's on a roll somewhere. Doesn't matter what denomination you are. That's true of almost every one of them in some form. I went through a class even. I was better than other places that just say you have to confess. I went through a class. I graduated. It's somewhat facetious, but then it's, I've actually had people say, I went to this denomination and joined, I went to that literal church a church, but of a denomination. And I even went over to the Catholic side and maybe even the Mormon, I got it all covered. I've had people say that. Obviously they don't have an understanding. And then, so what are we counting on? Are we counting on my father and my grandfather or my mother and my grandmother and the heritage of others and their salvation? Oh, mine was a pastor. What about yours? You got a pastor in your family? Got a priest in your family?
Yep.
Yeah. Second cousins, dog's neighbor, whatever, live next door. Or we're Americans, right? We're Americans. That's our genetics in essence. It's not really genetic. But I was born American, therefore I was born Christian. I was carried into church prior to my birth. Right? Yeah. Some of us weren't raised in church. Some of us weren't raised with people who went to church. I was. That's a good thing, but that didn't save me. At every one of these things, you need to stop and say, that didn't save me. That didn't save me. What saved me? What Jesus did, and at a point in time, God said, I'm talking to you. Lift up your head. I want to talk to you. Don't look around and see who you're better than, or don't look at your credentials, or like I've said sometimes, this wagon load of great things I have done that I'm carrying behind me on my way, because that's going to be burned up with hay and stubble. What are you counting on? Are you counting on your family title? Are you counting on your position in community? Are you counting on your position in church? There are pastors who get saved. There are deacons who get saved. There are elders who get saved because maybe they were counting on they were counting on the wrong things. And people looked at them like a King Saul who stood head and shoulders above everyone else and thought, doesn't he look like? But being a deacon doesn't make you anything. Hopefully you became a deacon, if you were, because in the case of a man, because somebody saw that you had a servant's heart, not a ruling heart. Deacons are never to rule. They're a servant. They should be setting up chairs and turning on lights and locking doors and visiting people who need them and stuff like that. Elders, though, are to make decisions and work along with the pastor who's an elder. That's the way it's supposed to be, according to the Bible. And most churches don't have elders. And they might see their pastor as the elder, and nowhere does it say singular, it's always plural. So some people say, well, we've got a staff of pastors. So whatever, but what are you counting on? Your name's on a roll, went through a class, sprinkled as a baby, or at some point in time after you walked forward after a VBS or whatever, you were put underwater. I've told you before, I was christened as a baby, I was baptized as an unbeliever, and in order to join a church, and I was baptized later after salvation. I was a really wet sinner. And these did not save me. What were you going to say, brother?
You mentioned that, you mentioned sprinkling twice, and now you mentioned, I was listening to a religious program, and the statement made was, all the people have been sprinkled, done this, done that, and when they were a baby or they were 12, and he said, you have not been, it's not good enough, you have not been baptized until you were older, and that you have been dunked in the water.
Immersed.
So what difference does that do except for maybe a little more maturity? You know what you've
Okay, go back to, does baptism save?
No,
Water immersion baptism
But it's very
doesn't
symbolic.
save. It's definitely symbolic. It's been given
Jesus was
as a and Jesus was baptized. But the symbolism of baptism is the idea that Jesus died and was raised to newness of life. So you go under the water to die, and you come out of the water in newness of life. And yes, Jesus was baptized in water, but to get hung up in, okay, let me just put it this way. The thief on the cross, where's the water?
right.
There was no water.
So
Okay.
it doesn't matter if you're baptized, but it matters if you've been saved.
It matters that you walk in obedience to be baptized, because it says we should go through that as
Okay.
to identify ourselves as a Christian.
And that's why you
It's an
said
act
that.
of obedience. It
Yeah.
is not anything that saves you, any more than I could get baptized to get saved.
Yeah.
Okay? And then there's other places that talk about baptism, and they're not talking about water baptism. They're talking about that identification with Christ. Or even it said you're going to be baptized by fire, meaning the Holy Spirit's going to come in. And that's your, that it's not that you start speaking in tongues. That's not, although some taught that. So we get things really messed up sometimes, and we really need to stop. But the great questions and things to think about, but really continue to ask yourself, what have I counted on? And if it's anything apart from that moment in time that God brings you to, where you know that you're a sinner and you need salvation, and Jesus did it, it's all been done for you. And you can find yourself on that list of the called, the chosen, the faithful. Then you accept the gift of salvation. That's all we do. I didn't earn it, couldn't. I had my filthy rags righteousness, and God takes that and gives me His righteousness. I don't make that. But now that I have it, I get to live it because I've been given it. Just like if I didn't have $1 in my bank account and you went and put $100 in there, I might be able to go buy some groceries. I couldn't before. My debit card wouldn't have worked, I could have written a check and it would have bounced. But, in that economy of God, He has to put it in. So again, at the point of salvation, you've heard me say this, I can do it up there. This is the moment. This is my past. Everything was sin. I was born in that. I get to this point right here of salvation, or I get to this point, and Jesus at this point paid for all of it. I'm at zero righteousness. This is negative righteousness. I'm at zero righteousness. That doesn't get me into heaven. I like the fact that Jesus paid the price for my sin, and He cleared my account, but I can't go to the store and buy anything on that. So what I have to have? I have to have that infusion of positive righteousness, His righteousness. I can't make that happen. It has to come at salvation. And then I get to dwell on this side of things, and someday I get to dwell here. I get to dwell here maybe, but certainly here. No, not here maybe. I will be raptured. Keep me on track. But we have to ask ourselves, have we faced that? I had to come to a point at 29 years old, having been raised in the church and been assured over and over and over again through things that people did to me, as well as things I did for the wrong reasons. I took the class for the wrong reason. I didn't want to be left out. I wanted to be a member. So I went through a class. And then I walked up and I said the right things. I answered the questions. None of it saved me. It did keep me from some bad behavior. And then at 29, just had that time, that moment. That's when it happened for me. That I could not turn away from. I am not better than others. I might be better than others in human reason, but that doesn't save me. I don't come to heaven and God says your good outweighs your bad. Or wait a minute, let's line everybody up and you're better than, the top 10% get to get in and you made the cut. That's not how it works. It's not comparative. It's only if I have Jesus' righteousness. Have my robes been washed in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they're white. It doesn't make any sense, but it's the way God says it. Yes, Martha?
Well, like the song, Jesus got a hold of my heart.
Yeah,
And
right. It's all about that moment. You may not remember the date. You may have been young. I'm not beating you. I've been in places where they beat them up if they couldn't name the date. I know mine was in November, and I can tell you the year. And I know I was morning sick that morning.
you remember the day in your mind.
Yeah, I remember where I was. I remember all of that. I'd have to go back to a calendar because I know the year and tell you it was the first Sunday in November of the year 1992, because Sophie was born in 93. You know, I would have to go back to a calendar, but I know where I was and I know that moment. And even then, I didn't know a whole lot. I had to learn over time afterwards and line myself. God had to pull a bunch of weeds out and still does. But, you know, he had to bring things to the surface. But there was that moment. And there have been times of doubt after that. And that's why the helmet of salvation is so important, because the mind can come under attack. And that's why we put on that armor over and over again, put on that armor. But the idea of I did not want to be deceived again. And I would just beg God, if I think I am and I'm not, I don't want to think I am and I'm not. And he would give me reminders and assurances, and he does give us assurances. And he does give us those things in our lives that I would not have done right if it had not been for the Spirit in my life, for instance. A forgiveness. I forgave something that should have absolutely devastated and crippled me. And I did not do that. Yeah, I participated. But God had to have done that through me. It is not me at all when that happens. Trust me, I've got a whole lot of unforgiveness issues I'm dealing with all the time. But, so, we gotta move, we gotta stop. We're way over our time. So, anyway, we'll pray and we'll have our food. But just ask yourself, what are you counting on? Are you in the Lamb's Book of Life? And I think we've already dealt with that, or are we coming up that? We've got 2 more lessons. And you got a lifetime to figure the rest of it out too, and be reminded. Heavenly Father, it is a weighty lesson. It's an exciting lesson.